Okay, Tonga, Fiji, and Samoa are threatening to boycott the Rugby Union World Cup in Japan this year, and this is to do with World Rugby's announcement on restructuring the international test calendar, which has gone down like a lead balloon. Tier one nations, some of their players are going out. Are you trying to kill us because we already play enough rugby? And there's discussions in place to limit the amount of games played by professional players in a calendar year for safety reasons, and that we can debate the pros and cons of that. Are players playing too much or too little, or is the domestic season too long? Should there be a international break for players, because we have the Six Nations, the summer tours or winter tours, depending on North or Southern Hemisphere, the autumn internationals or spring internationals, and that's just your standard international calendar already. Also, the payment for players at Tier 1 level, Tier 1 nations over Tier 2 per international appearance. It's £20,000, for example, for an England player. For a Fijian player, it's £500. We saw that in a recent international a couple of years ago between the two nations. That created a massive debate about revenue sharing. World Rugby hasn't covered that. The fact that Namibia were concerned about being able to pay their players at this year's World Cup and get a team together because of financial concerns. They've now announced, okay, we should be able to go, but we're not certain that we can, keep the players fed, paid, looked after. So the Namibian Rugby Union are very, very concerned about their finances. Samoan Rugby Union are bankrupt. Georgia, Romania, and Russia, how are they ever going to are they going to keep knocking on the door of the Six Nations? Because they're finding the same barriers put in place that the Italians found 25 years ago. The Argentinians, I think, should be using their voice to actually aid the Tier 2 nations, because they were shut out of the Southern Hemisphere's Tri-Nations for so long when they were actually more than capable of playing in it, as proven in the last 3 World Cups. They finally relented and let them in. So there are some nations that could do more to help the smaller nations grow by also threatening to boycott. If we had bigger nations going, we're going to boycott over this policy, that might create some traction. But the Samoans, the Tongans, and the Fijians, Daniel Leo is representing their players' unions, and he said this is where we were hoping to avoid back in 1995 with professionalism. This was meant to cure all these problems. This is putting up massive barriers in our path, and it's making it more difficult for us to play better, develop our skills, also to develop rugby union at basic, development level. And then Stuart Lancaster has come out and said, it's dangerous. He's 100% by all the players, and he backs any action. When you have a former international coach of a Tier 1 nation going, yeah, no, I'm actually supporting these players in their protest, that says how out of touch World Rugby is. World Rugby's turning into FIFA. They're chasing the money. They're not actually putting fans and players and development. And supposedly the game is for all. No, it's not. No, it's not. This is a protectionist policy designed to make sure the Tier 2 nations know their place. The Tier 1 nations must be allowed to be Tier 1 nations, it seems. Also, another issue is professionals in 1995 hasn't benefited all. Canada, the World Cup before 95 and 91, reached the quarterfinals. The only Tier 1 nation to do so. They were the last team to qualify in 2018 for this current World Cup that is coming. They've slipped below Uruguay in the world standing, but Uruguay have actually got a decent side with a lot of professional players in it now. So professionalism has taken its time to get to Uruguay, but for Canada, it's not been beneficial to Canada. Hasn't. Canada have really slipped down. USA, the only reason why USA and Japan are in this World League thing is the money. Japan have got the World Cup, and the USA now form Major League Rugby with the assistance of the Canadians to a certain extent, but they've suddenly got commercial backing from big corporations. The Americans have improved massively in recent years. Absolutely. I'm not denying the improvement that the US have put in, and the fact they are now getting test matches regularly against first-tier nation sides is good. The Japanese, well, yeah, they're ahead of the curve over the Americans by a good 5-10 years. But if only those two are allowed in, what about all the rest? Tonga, Fiji, and Samoa have great rugby histories. Georgia have improved markedly since their first Rugby World Cup appearance in 2003. The Russians have been at several World Cups. The Romanians, apart from this World Cup, well, they haven't qualified, as we know, for behavioural reasons on the field and a bit of they got thrown out, but they've regularly qualified and they've actually got a professional league. The Georgians have a professional league. The Russians have a professional league. World Rugby is not doing enough to develop those club games at domestic level either, and the Georgians risk their best players, who most of them play in France, ending up playing for the French. The Romanians have had a couple of players nicked by the Italians and other nations. The Russians, I think, have had one or two players that have switched allegiance as well. While the issue isn't as bad for those nations because they do actually have structured leagues in place that people do play in, I think they will also start looking at the South Sea Islanders and going, should we join their boycott? And if enough nations do, then it makes a mockery of this World Cup that I was really looking forward to. But World Rugby seems to have shot itself in the foot with their proposals, which are not concrete. They aren't set in stone, but they have to take on board the massive criticism from fans and players alike. Players already are going, we're stretched to the limit. We can't do anymore. We physically can't. Our welfare is paramount. And the smaller countries with the poorer unions are going, you're basically creating a bigger two-tier system where it's the rich boys club versus everyone else, and we're not developing as we should because we're not getting the opportunity to play against the best as we should. But there we go. Thank you very much for watching. Please like and subscribe, place your comments below, and I'll have some more videos for you soon.